guys. Okay, so this week we get to talk about Iron Man. I'm gonna apologize ahead of time if I seem just a little bit like tired and washed out, or if I get a little bit pissy. It's come to that wonderful time where I get just a little bit of red in my ledger every month, and oh god, it's fun. But the fun thing is, I get to bitch about Tony Stark, which is pretty much one of my favorite things in the entire world, because while I love the man to bits and pieces, oh my god, this character. Stan Lee created the character that you hate to love, not that you love to hate. Like, you quite literally hate to love this man because you just, oh, it hurts so much. So yes, yeah, we're going to be talking about Iron Man this week. His creation, his villains, the meaning behind him and all that stuff. But yes, so let's get started. Okay, so first things first, Iron Man was created by Stan Lee, and he was designed by Jack Kirby. Those two names are going to be very important in the next coming weeks and stuff. Jack Kirby is pretty much the equivalent of Stan Lee when it comes to the creation of all the characters that came out in the early 60s and 70s. That was really kind of the baby boom of the comic world. All these different characters were introduced. A lot of them ended up getting their own lines of comics. This is when all of the great characters that we know and love today got their start. So, we're going to start this baby boom with Tony Stark, the son of Howard Stark and Maria Stark. The first appearance of this character was in Tales of Suspense, issue number 39, in March 1963, not 36. Okay, so the thing I need to tell you guys about this comic, Tales of Suspense, this is the string of comics where a lot of these comic characters get their start. Iron Man gets his start in it, the Hulk gets his start in it, Natasha Romanoff gets her start in it. I want to say Hawkeye does too. But yeah, a lot of these characters that just like goes on and on and on the list, they were all created and they were introduced in this string of comics. And of course, if their popularity was such, they would split off and have their own adventures. So, kind of to give you the basis and the reasoning behind Iron Man's character, I kind of have to give you just a little bit of history for 1963. Okay, so in the year 1963, the last Mercury flight is launched. This is the U.S. space program that was a precursor to the Apollo missions in manned space flight. Then we also have Edward Lorenz. He published his discovery of the butterfly effect, which is very significant in the creation of the chaos theory. The first liver and lung transplants are performed in this year. They weren't successful, but you still have scientific revolutions going on, and the space race, just all these technical advancements that are coming about. A nuclear test ban treaty is signed by the U.S., the U.K., and the USSR. You have the CIA Domestic Operations Division is created. JFK gave a bunch of speeches. Martin Luther King and gave his I Have a Dream speech. Malcolm X gave his grassroots speech. A lot of protests were going on in the civil rights movement, but also in response to the actions of the U.S. starting to get involved in the foreign political aspects of certain countries directly in response to the communist takeover of Russia. That really, they were spreading the Iron Curtain, basically. It was in response to the Iron Curtain. The Red Scare was going on, Senator MacArthur and all of that fun jazz. Then you have Kennedy assassinated at the very end of the year, and then Lyndon Johnson getting us involved in the Vietnam War, which sparked a lot of protests by the younger people of the generation who were not wanting to get involved in another war off home soil, you know. It wasn't even 20 years after the end of World War II, and the U.S. wanted to get involved into another war off American soil, where they would have to send their young men off to die on the soil that wasn't theirs. And all for no political gain, no land gain, no nothing. None of that would happen. So you can obviously see that there would be issues with the public wanting to get involved with this. So protests were starting to rear their ugly heads. And there was a lot of war profiteering going on. You have the nuclear bombs and stuff being tested. Of course, the testing ban was put on specifically for this. You have people making their profit from these scientific and technical advances when it comes to war, the American war machine. So yeah, but we also have Doctor Who and James Bond both premiering their first episode and first movie ever, like in the history of ever. There would be no Matt Smith or Daniel Craig if it weren't for the year 1963. Then also the Beatles hit it big, and that's what you missed on Glee. Yay! Now we're going to get into Tony Stark, okay? Once again, this is going to be a part of the lecture where I basically give you a lot of information in a short amount of time, just like I did in the last lecture with Captain America. This is going to be his team affiliates, his partnerships, his abilities, and stuff like that. I'm not really going to get into his villains per se, except for the Mandarin, which is the most important one, and then the villains that he fights with the Avengers. So, to start off with, the alter ego of Iron Man is one Anthony Edward Stark, born to Howard and Maria Stark on Long Island. Okay, so his team affiliates, he's part of Stark Industries. There's actually like 1,000,001 different versions of Stark Industries that Tony creates over the years. I tried to keep track of how many it was, and I think it was roughly 5 different names and different Stark companies that are created throughout Tony Stark's life. And I use life as the life of the comic character, not the actual man himself, because he has died so many times. But yeah, so his major affiliate is the Stark Industries. Then we also have the Avengers, the West Coast Avengers, S.H.I.E.L.D. He was actually the Secretary of Defense for a while, so he's team affiliated with the Department of Defense. The Thunderbolts, he was part of the Guardians of the Galaxy for a little bit. He was part of the Illuminati. Yes, he was in fact one of the ones that kidnapped the Preferiti and branded and killed them one by one, while Tom Hanks had to go and follow Bernini statues to get to the Church of Illumination. Shit, no, that's Dan Brown. Sorry. But yeah, no, Tony Stark is part of the Illuminati. And he was also part of a group called ForceWorks. So yeah, not as many team affiliations as Captain America, but he does get around just a little bit. But mostly it's his own doing because he just keeps creating new branches of Stark Industries. And of course those are listed as different team affiliations, and I'm just like, pick one and stick with it, man. But then now, let's start in with the partnerships. There's really, like, not any specific ones to Tony other than War Machine and Rescue. Captain America and Thor are kind of like Tony's biffles, if you want to say that. They're the ones who are most set up opposite each other and in partnership with each other through different Avengers issues and stuff. They're kind of like three main leaders versus the dual leadership with Tony and Captain. Thor's kind of there supporting both of them. So I mean, like, you've got Thor as the foundation, then Tony and Steve, who are also the leaders. It gets really confusing leadership-wise. But War Machine and Rescue. War Machine, of course, is James Rhodey Rhodes. If you remember from the movies, the second Iron Man movie, the suit that Rhodey steals and modifies himself, that's technically the War Machine armor, but in the comics, it's specifically made for Rhodey. But except not really. It's given to him by Tony Stark, but it was technically calibrated for Tony Stark, and so there's issues there. But then Rescue is Pepper Potts' suit, and oh my gosh, Pepper Potts. What can I say about Pepper Potts? Oh, I hear her hair is insured for $10,000. Of course, I also hear that she does car commercials in Japan, but what can you say? Basically, she's the most awesome person in the entire world. Love her to death. Contrary to what the Marvel Cinematic Universe will tell you, she and Tony Stark really don't have a personal relationship, meaning romantic relationship. They're really close friends, and of course she's secretary and sometimes CEO and just weird workings, industry-wise, corporate stuff. Haha, fun. I'm not a business major. I don't know that stuff. So, but yeah, she and Tony have more professional and friendship relationship versus a professional/romantic relationship as portrayed in the movies. She, however, is married to, then divorced, then remarried to Happy Hogan, Jon Favreau's character in the movies. Also, he's the director, so yeah. Okay, so Iron Man's abilities, basically it's Tony Stark with his genius-level intelligence, paired with whatever abilities the suit can have. So there's a point where he kind of has like a cyberpathic, which is kind of like telepathic, but that's with cyber materials and stuff, to earlier versions of his suit. The suit, of course, gives him super strength, supersonic speed, a flight. He has energy repulsors. The repulsor technology is actually one of the most important technologies to the Iron Man suit. But of course he also has missiles, and there's a level of durability and regenerative life support that the suit offers Tony. A lot of times it's basically what's keeping him alive is the technology used for his suit. So, In the creation of Iron Man, Stan Lee was toying with the idea of a businessman superhero, basically the quintessential capitalist, a character against every single spirit of the time and the Marvel readership. So basically, everything that the average Marvel reader would hate, basically. You'll find as we go on, Stan Lee is kind of a little shit when it comes to creating his characters, because he'll choose and create a character specifically to make sure that the readers have to like him against every fiber of their being. It's hilarious. Like, seriously, Stan Lee, in interviews, has said that in creating Iron Man, he wanted to take a character nobody would like and shove him down their throats and make them like him. And then he became quite popular. So basically, Iron Man is created to force people to like the one thing that they hate the most. Stan Lee, everyone. Stan Lee. He was a wealthy, glamorous ladies' man, outwardly invulnerable, but inside he was wounded so much. He's quite literally heartbroken. He has a broken heart. Thus, he's a broken man. There's a lot of metaphor in that that we could go into, but we gotta finish the stories, and then we'll go into metaphors. His original appearance and stuff was based on Howard Hughes. He was based very heavily on that. In the creation development of his character, his appearance, just all those things, he was influenced by Howard Hughes. So, the original suit that was created by Jack Kirby, because Jack Kirby was the one who designed him. He didn't create the character, but he designed the character. But originally, the suit was a hulky gray mass. Basically, think the beginning of Iron Man, where he builds this suit in a cave in Afghanistan. Quite literally, that's what it looks like. It is just a hunk of gray. Not attractive whatsoever. But by the second issue, it becomes the sleeker red and gold design that we're all so familiar and so in love with. He was originally an anti-communist hero, defeating the Vietnamese agents, but then later on Stan Lee kind of regretted that turn. And in later issues, Tony Stark's character is created to be more well-rounded. They develop more of his actual character versus what his character is representing to defeat, if you catch my drift. Basically, it creates Tony Stark the man versus Iron Man, Tony Stark the hero. And of course, in doing so, Stan Lee and his brother all, they both kind of create these complexities to Tony Stark's character, including severe alcoholism, which plays very heavily in his entire storyline. But in May 1968, Iron Man gets his very first solo comic, and he's one of the founding members of the Avengers, and that's very important to note that he was there from the beginning, and he has been there since the beginning. He's gone through a lot of shit with them, but he has always technically been a part of the Avengers, as long as the Avengers have been around. Now, how Tony gets his wound was changed and updated quite a few times throughout the span of his character. The original wound in 1963 was received in the Vietnam War, and then, of course, in the 1990s, it was updated to the first Gulf War, and then later on it was further updated to be he received the wounds in the war in Afghanistan. But no matter where and what time frame the wound took place, Yinsen was there in like nearly all of them. I think there was only one instance, and that was a direct-to-DVD animated feature where Yinsen was not part of the origin story of Tony Stark. Or, not Tony Stark, Iron Man. But yeah. So, he's very important, Yinsen. He's very important to Tony's character. It's good to think of him as Tony's Erskine. You know how Steve was basically created by Erskine. It was Yinsen who basically creates Iron Man. They're very important figures in these two men's lives. They're the ones who kind of give them that push. They either give them the ability to become more than his weaknesses and become the hero that America needs at the time with Captain America, or he pushes Tony Stark to kind of take responsibility for his actions, forces him to start caring about other people, and creating a hero bent on serving and saving people. Both of these are incredibly important. So remember Yinsen and Erskine. I can't pronounce both their names. I'm so sorry. I'm sure these pronunciations are absolutely horrible, but I try so hard. But yeah. So, basically, the setup with Iron Man is that he was the industry side of the struggle with communism. The Fantastic Four and the Incredible Hulk were both set up as different facets of the struggle with communism. Fantastic Four being the domestic element of it, and then Hulk being the government struggle with communism, basically. So, I mean, they're all dealing with communism, but Iron Man and Tony Stark are really the industry aspect. And kind of not necessarily war profiteering, but kind of, yeah, making his fortune off of helping the military further their wars, basically. He was also kind of the ideal portrait of an American inventor of the 1960s. He was what every inventor wanted to be in the 1960s, but seeing as all the technical advances were made by groups of people and R&D departments in different companies, they were the ones that came up with the new advancements. It was very hard for a singular inventor to kind of step into the spotlight, basically. So Tony Stark went down as an inventor of his own accord, and that was what every inventor of the 60s wanted. They wanted to be like Thomas Edison or Tesla or Graham Bell. All of them, they wanted to have their name remembered specifically for inventing one thing, but of course they couldn't. And Tony Stark was kind of set up as I really want to be an inventor whose name is singular in its recognition, but that's never going to happen. But look at Tony Stark! So it was kind of like a struggle and war with that. It also struggles with entrepreneurial autonomy and government supervision of research, and the ultimate loyalty plays. All of these things, they really were important in the technological advances of the time, because a lot of the technological advances were products of military advancements. You have the space race, the people thinking that we could put military bases in space, which could help us in the Cold War. You have the nuclear research going on because, of course, nuclear bombs are better than the H bombs, which are better than the A bombs. all of these different things, all of these war advances. The computers were created to aid the military originally. So yeah, it's very much a part of Tony Stark's character, is that he has this entrepreneurial autonomy from the government, but he still has to produce for the government. And it causes some major emotional struggles and issues with Tony Stark himself. So Tony Stark's story starts when he is born on Long Island to Howard and Maria Stark. I think I've said this about 4 times now, but his parents were Howard and Maria Stark. He enters MIT at the age of 15, and his undergrad is in electrical engineering. He then later gets his master's in electrical engineering and in physics. Then Howard and Maria die in a plane crash, and Tony then inherits Stark Industries. Then he is captured and forced to create weapons of mass destruction. But while, during his capture, he was wounded severely, and there is, shrapnel inside him that's closing in on his heart. So the people who captured him, at the time, who were Vietnamese, then it's later turned into the Ten Rings. They also have a prisoner, Dr. Ho Yinsen, a Nobel Prize-winning physicist there, and Yinsen develops this magnetic chest plate. It's not the arc reactor as we know it from the movies, but rather it's a basically like an entire chest plate that he has to have on to keep the shrapnel away from his heart and to keep it from killing him. So then, while they're both captured, instead of creating the weapons of mass destruction, like the people who captured him want, he and Yinsen secretly build a suit of armor. Basically, it's what happens in the movie, except the original storyline is in Vietnam. I think that's actually where it is, because I know it's the Vietnamese who capture him. But it's basically the entire story. Yinsen sacrifices himself for Tony Stark to give him time to recharge and then escape. After he escapes, he tries to get to the American troops, and along the way he runs into a wounded Marine pilot by the name of James Rhodes, who will later become Rhodey, one of the most awesome characters. I love me some Rhodey. Okay, so once he gets home and once he gets stateside, Tony realizes that he can never remove the shrapnel that's in his body. It's surgically impossible, so he has to then wear the magnetic chest plate for the entirety of his life. He wears it underneath his clothing. And so it also means he has to kind of recharge his batteries every single day. I used to have an old phone that would lose its charge after one day, and so you'd have to charge it every single night. Basically, that's what Tony has to do, but with his body, So, in order to stay alive and keep his heart pumping, he has to recharge every night. God. So, the story behind Iron Man is that he is Tony Stark's bodyguard and kind of corporate mascot in a sense. If you remember this from the end of the first Iron Man movie, the cover story that Coulson gives Tony Stark, the S.H.I.E.L.D. issued cover story, is that he's a bodyguard. And of course, Robert Downey Jr.'s Tony Stark, one and the same anyway, so what the hell. Robert Downey Jr. replies, who would believe that he was my bodyguard? Like, seriously, who comes up with this stuff? Which is funny because for the longest time, like up until 2002, when he actually officially comes out and says, I am Iron Man, the people of the Marvel Universe did not know that Tony Stark was in fact Iron Man. So I find that incredibly funny, and you guys should too. Irony. Cinematic justices! Yay! You'll find that happens a lot. But during this time, like once Tony Stark comes back stateside, Iron Man is introduced to the public. Iron Man starts to fight communist opponents, which include Black Widow, the Crimson Dynamo, and Titanium Man. These are all specifically communist opponents. They're either sent by the Soviets or sent by Soviet-run agencies, in Natasha's case. But he also fights individuals who are not associated with communism. This is the Mandarin. This villain is Tony Stark's main big bad. Like, it's hard. He is Tony's Thunderbolt Ross, which we'll get into in 2 weeks. He is the main person that Tony Stark just, like, can't seem to catch a break from. It's going to play a big part in Iron Man 3, along with the extremist plotline, which I will tell you guys about later on in this video because it is important. I need to explain these things for you guys so that you can start understanding and know what's coming in Phase 2 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But at this same time, after a while, Tony kind of flounders under the no one knowing my dual identity thing, and so he ends up telling only 2 people. One person being Harold Happy Hogan, his chauffeur. It's Jon Favreau's character in the Iron Man movies. And then he also tells one Virginia Pepper Potts, aka the greatest person in the entire world. But at the same time, Rhodey kind of becomes Stark's personal pilot and his biffle, and they're buddies, and yay! You remember from the first Iron Man movie, Terrence Howard's Rhodey, he's a pilot, he's kind of there for Tony, and they're just really good friends, and I'm really sad that they weren't friends like they were back in middle school in the second movie, and if I could, I would just bake them a cake of rainbows and just make it happy again, but I can't, because I don't go there. But during the comic production, once the opposition to the Vietnam started to rise, the Vietnam War, like the student protest reached a certain level, Stan Lee kind of decided that it was time to soften the anti-communist aspect of the Iron Man character and the Iron Man comics. And so at that point it evolves into Tony questioning the morality of producing weapons for the military, kind of not exactly an existential crisis, but yeah, it pretty much was. But at this time it's also revealed his narcissistic and self-serving qualities. Basically he ends up deciding that, okay, so I'm creating weapons that maybe aren't being used for the best purposes, but the ends justify the means sort of thing, and this ends up causing a lot of strife in personal relationships. And it also kind of leads to Tony not really producing for the government per se anymore, like the American military and stuff. Like, he's not really producing for them specifically. However, he does use his personal fortune to outfit himself with technological advances and militant advances for his Iron Man suit. But he also helps and produces for S.H.I.E.L.D. He was the one who actually came up with the designs for the Quinjet, and also the image inducers that were used by the X-Men. During this time, also, he starts to develop a severe dependency on alcohol. He suffers majorly with guilt and all of this stuff. Basically, he's going through a lot of the same stuff that Steve was going through, but instead of channeling it into saving people, he channels it into the bottle. But thankfully, or I guess, yeah, he eventually kicks that habit to an extent with the help of the then girlfriend, Bethany Cabe, and his friends. He's able to kind of get his alcoholism under control. Then there's this whole little mini story series with Dr. Doom that I find incredibly hilarious. Dr. Doom, of course, has issues, and he causes problems with Tony, and by some means of events, they end up back in King Arthur's court. And then Doom tries to proposition Morgana Le Fay to help him, but then Tony puts a stop to that. Then Doom swears vengeance. Of course, then Iron Man and Doom kiss and make up because they have to be mutually beneficial to get themselves back to their home time. And it's just one of the most hilarious interludes of comics, like, ever. I just love it so much, because it's, Tony Stark, his character, throughout the comics, kind of has a, fascination and love affair with Camelot and King Arthur's court. There have been, analyzations of the set design, actually, in the Avengers, of Stark Tower, the scene where he, faces Loki, and they're kind of exchanging quips. I have an army, we have a Hulk. That area, that time frame. If you look behind Tony, the setup and the interior design of that floor of the tower looks very much like the inside of a fortress, a castle, basically. You have these really tall, narrow windows, like would be seen in castles, for areas where archers could be positioned to defend the fortress. But this kind of is an overarching theme to Tony's character. It's one of the many facets of his character. Basically, the two things Tony Stark is known for is his love of Camelot and his love of alcohol. It's a great combination. But yeah. So after that brief little interlude with Doom and Camelot and that stuff, once he's back in his own time, Obadiah Stane starts emotionally manipulating Tony Stark, causing him to relapse in his alcoholism. And this ends up leading to Tony losing Stark International, which was the name of the company at the time. And he really, really, really dives headfirst into a pool of whiskey and severe alcohol dependency at this time. He kind of becomes homeless because Stane has taken everything. And this leads to Tony revealing himself as Iron Man to Rhodey, who then takes the form and the mantle of Iron Man off of Tony's shoulders, so kind of gives him a chance to recover and to be rehabilitated. And this is the time Tony kind of gets involved with Force Works. He starts working on new technologies, which helps him kick the habit of his alcoholism, and he's rehabilitated for the time being. The armor that Tony gives Rhodey, however, is not specifically calibrated for him, and so Rhodey kind of ends up having kind of a similar effect to one of the replacement Captain Americas. You guys remember how he injected himself with these failed serum to try and emulate Captain America, but that ends up causing him to go insane and paranoid. This is very similar to what's happening to Rhodey right now. The suit, because it has this cyber pathic connection with the operator, basically the suit and the person wearing the suit become one, essentially. There's that level of interface where the two of them connect. Because of this, it's not calibrated for Rhodey. It ends up causing extreme paranoia, which leads to Rhodey kind of going on a rampage as Iron Man, in which Tony has to kind of step in and be like, hey man, chill. And they kind of have a little tiff and a little battle where Rhodey gives up the suit and he's like, okay, I'm done with this shit, man, you take it. At which point Tony then has to take care of Obadiah Stane, who has created his own suit, the Ironmonger, and is causing all sorts of havoc and rampaging and stuff, and so Tony has to go and confront him, and then Tony defeats Obadiah, but because Obadiah does not want to face a trial, he actually commits suicide, like right there, and Tony's left. Then, instead of taking back Stark International, he just kind of creates a new company. This is one of the first ones that he creates, where he's just like, yeah, no, I'm just not going to go through all the hoops to get that company back. I'm just going to start a new one. And this one is Stark Enterprises. So, yes, that is what happens kind of during the 60s run of Iron Man. Okay, during the late 80s and early 90s of the Iron Man comics, it kind of runs into a string of issues where basically Tony Stark is trying to get his tech back. Plans and designs and stuff had been stolen from him, and there are less than savory individuals using these designs to do their nefarious deeds and whatnot. So you have Tony Stark going to try and get his designs back and to destroy all the tech that they're able to produce using these plans, because Tony Stark doesn't want his tech being used for evil. He kind of gets a little trigger happy and actually ends up defeating and taking down a tech-based supervillain who did not base his technology on stolen plans from Stark Industries. This really ruins Iron Man's public image, and he attacks he ends up attacking a government official known as Stingray. And then the government kind of gets mad at Tony, and then it gets really complicated and complex. It ends up basically Tony Stark renounces Iron Man publicly, continues being Iron Man, while Tony Stark doesn't approve of Iron Man. Iron Man goes off to Russia, does some stuff over there. There's defeats, and it's really crazy, and it doesn't make a lick of sense. But it builds on Tony's need to control, basically. He doesn't want the things that he's using to better the world to also be used to harm the world. This kind of plays into the whole idea of technology, how it can be used for good and evil. Okay, so at the same time that Tony is going into the existential crisis mode, with his technology being used for evil and all that craziness, it's revealed that Tony Stark's health is severely deteriorating due to the cybernetic interface with the suit. It's irreversibly damaging his nervous system. And this is then furthered by a failed attempt on his life by a mentally unbalanced former lover. That is word for word verbatim what it said online. But yeah, that injures his spine, causing him to be paralyzed from the waist down. So he implants this nerve chip into his spine, and it allows him to gain back his mobility through the use of this suit, and it's really crazy scientifically, but the cool thing about it is it could become true one day. The plausibility of the scientific advancements in comics are becoming more and more nearing on reality, which I find the coolest thing in the world. Except for when the robots rise and overtake the human underlings. Because, I mean, it's only a matter of time before the computers reach sentience, and then we're screwed. Then we have to have our own superheroes. So, Tony's deteriorated nervous system causes him to create quite a few advancements to the suit. There's a certain kind of nerve skin that he creates. It's called Variable Threat Response Battle Suit. Well, that's actually the War Machine armor. But that was originally created to wear and to help him be more heavily protected in battles. But then ultimately, the damage to his nervous system becomes too extreme, and he has to basically put himself on ice. He fakes his death and then puts himself into suspended animation to allow his body to heal, because that works in comics. And during that time, Rhodey is left in charge of Stark Enterprises and the Iron Man suit to keep the peace, basically. So while Tony's regrowing every cell in his body, at least the nervous system ones, Rhodey is taking care of things. But then when Stark comes back after having made a full recovery, Rhodey is pretty pissed off that Tony manipulated his friends like that, and this causes a tiff between the two of them, and they pretty much go their separate ways. But they're still kind of friends, and it's an awkward, it's complicated relationship, as it would be defined on Facebook. But there's also a series of comics entitled The Crossing, which reveals Iron Man as a traitor in the Avengers ranks. Basically, it's revealed that he was manipulated by time-traveling dictator King the Conqueror. And we'll get to that in the him, not of that, it's a him. We'll get to him whenever we talk about the Avengers villains, where it's for the entire team, because that is he is an important villain and adversary to the Avengers. He's one of the most challenging, most difficult. He's on the top 10 list of Ultimate Avengers villains. So yeah, we'll get talking about him. But during this time frame, Tony Stark is being manipulated by Kang. So the Avengers go back in time in an alternate universe reality and get the teenage Tony Stark from there, bring him back to their universe, allow him to see what Iron Man and his older self is doing under the manipulation of Kang the Conqueror, thus causing teenage Tony Stark to create his own Iron Man suit and become Iron Man and fight with the Avengers. And then the sight of seeing his younger self fighting with the Avengers causes Stark to regain enough memory and control of himself to sacrifice his life to stop Kang. And then young Tony Stark makes more suits. He gains legal control of the company, and he stays in present-day Marvel Universe, essentially becoming Tony Stark. But then, in a battle with Onslaught, Tony Stark dies. Teenage Tony Stark dies. And Franklin Richards is actually able to save all the people who die when they're fighting Onslaught, which actually includes Hawkeye. Spoiler alert. Sorry, he dies a couple times. But anyway, so what Franklin Richards does is he basically recreates the superheroes from his memory. It's really weird, confusing setup, but it makes sense in comic logic. So Franklin, he rebuilds all of them, recreates them, and the Tony Stark that comes back at that point actually has all of the memories of both the Tony Starks, the version that Kang was manipulating and took over, and the teenage Tony Stark from the alternate timeline. And so at that point, he kind of views himself as both of those individuals, in one body. And then during the time of his death, his company was sold, and then instead of trying to get it back, he just makes another company, and that's how Stark Solutions comes about. Yeah. Seriously, he just creates a new company at every drop of the hat, you know? But also, whenever he was recreated by Richards, he got a fully functional heart, no longer having to rely on an artificial heart or rely on the suit, basically. And once he returns, he demands a hearing for his actions and stuff, to be put on trial. But he's cleared of any wrongdoing, and he joins the Avengers again. Early into the 2000s, there's an instance where Tony's suit gains sentience. Because it's going to happen, people. The computers are going to take over the world. Sorry. So basically, the suit bypasses all these fail-safes that Tony Stark put in place specifically to keep his suit from gaining sentience, and it does, and it causes problems, and it goes on a rampage, and Tony has to stop it, and he during this fight, Tony has a heart attack, and then the suit, seeing Tony having this heart attack, sacrifices itself for its creator, giving him specific parts from himself, the suit, to Tony to create an artificial heart for himself, so that he can actually live. Thus ends the sentience of that thing, of the suit. But from then on out, Tony Stark, he's really cautious with his suits, and he actually starts using a older version of the suit, just so this whole thing can't really happen again. Then in 2002, Stark reveals his identity as Iron Man, which causes contract breaches with the U.S. government, and, okay, here, let me read it specifically, because it's really confusing. It's really, Stark publicly reveals his dual identity as Iron Man, not realizing that by doing so, he has invalidated the agreements protecting his armor from government duplication, since those contracts state that the Iron Man armor would be used by an employee of Tony Stark, not by Stark himself. And when he discovers that the United States military is again using his technology, Stark accepts a presidential appointment as Secretary of Defense instead of confronting them as he did before. He kind of basically does that to ensue that he can monitor the use of his technology rather than just specifically stopping them like he did before in the 80s, whenever he had his whole Man or a Muppet kind of emotional song and dance number. But yeah, if you remember from the second Iron Man movie, in the very beginning at the press conference, when Tony Stark jokingly says, I'm not a joiner, but I will consider Secretary of Defense if you're offering. Another one of those little jokes put in there by the writers, so that, you know, it kind of makes jabs at the comic stories, and it's really adorable how they do it. Then in Avengers Disassembled, when Stark is forced to resign after launching into a tirade against the Latvian ambassador at the United Nations being manipulated by the mentally imbalanced Scarlet Witch, who destroys the Avengers Mansion and kills several members. Yeah, the Scarlet Witch, it's Wanda Markinov. I can never pronounce her last name. She's the daughter of Magneto. But she is mentally imbalanced at this point and kind of goes crazy, destroys Avengers Mansion, kills several of the members, causes Tony to have the rampage against the Latvian ambassador. Latveria, of course, being the country that Dr. Doom owns, / is dictator of, / runs, / whatever you want to say. It's basically Dr. Doom's little power trip. He has his own country. Screw Tony Stark and his company. He has a country. But yeah, at that point, Tony then changes the location of the Avengers base from the Avengers Mansion, which of course was the house where Tony was born. It was also the Maria Stark Foundation. That is no longer the base for the Avengers. It's switched to Avengers Tower, Stark Tower. which actually is where we get it from the movies, the Avengers. If you see at the very end of the Avengers when Tony and Pepper are looking over blueprints of the tower and stuff, at that point Tony is actually working on designs for specific floors for the specific members of the Avengers. Basically building a frat house for the superhuman. Because there's really no other way to say it. Now, after that, Tony joins a group with Black Panther, Professor X, Mr. Fantastic, Black Bolt, Doctor Strange, and Namor. They kind of form this group called the Illuminati. It's basically a group of people with more foresight than the other superheroes. It's basically them talking about issues that could be coming up, how best to strategize, should something happen big enough that they have to all unite. Black Panther rejects membership to this group, so it's just them. And Tony Stark kind of used this as a way to set up a governing body for all superheroes in the world. This ends up failing miserably. But then during the Civil War, which I really don't want to get into because it's going to be bad enough the week that I actually do talk about it. But during the whole time of the Civil War, Tony Stark is spearheading the campaign for superhuman registration. He really does believe in it. He wants to be able to offer training to the younger superheroes. He wants them to basically be able to control their powers and not be a danger to society. He wants them to be the superheroes that they can be. And so that's how he views the Superhuman Registration Act. But when it gets to the point that they would be forcing people to register, that's when Captain America, of course, completely refuses that, and he goes off and has his own little group, the Secret Avengers. But Reed Richards and Hank Pym both support Tony in the registration. Basically, this is a pro and against registration whole thing. It's bloody and messy and horrible, and things go wrong that shouldn't go wrong because people think with their dicks instead of their brains, and all of these things happen, and it's really bad, and a lot of people die, and basically it's just messy and it's bloody, and I hate it, but it's an important part of these characters because it really deals with the idea that whether or not government should have a say in the workings and runnings of these superhuman teams, heroing teams, people who are saving, whether or not the government should have any power and any say in that, or it's bad. It's bad, guys. During this time, also, he's had the extremis virus implanted into his body, which basically, what it does is it rewires his entire body. He goes into this comatose state where his entire body scabs over and then the scabs fall away, and he's completely brand new. The extremist virus, basically it's like these little nano robotics that are injected into his bloodstream that rewrites his DNA. This is formulated by a couple of doctors, and it's actually pretty cool, and it's a pretty cool idea, but it's used for really nefarious purposes. It's really bad because it's not controlled, and this actually is going to play a very big part in Iron Man 3, because we have both the extremist virus having its say over rewriting and recreating Tony Stark as a human being, but you also have the Mandarin, who is challenging Tony Stark in every sense of the word, and Ben Kingsley is going to be the Mandarin, and I'm so excited because I love him. But anyway, so the extremist virus, it rewrites his DNA, and he actually reprograms it, because it is technically a computer virus, because it's the nanotechnology that's being used to rewrite his DNA. He manipulates that so that he can actually form more of an interface. Basically, he becomes a piece of technology himself. It's comic logic, but it's really cool comic logic. His brain becomes kind of like a hard drive, and it stores knowledge and stuff, the way that a computer would store knowledge. Unfortunately, this is bad because during the Civil War, and once things go to shit with the Civil War, they end up facing Norman Osborn, who wants to get the information that Tony knows. And so Tony Stark tries to delete the information inside his head. He does not try to commit suicide. That is absolutely not an option for Tony Stark, because he doesn't want to end up leaving the part of his brain that has the knowledge still intact, so that Osborn could come in and basically steal the information straight out of his head, since it's stored like a computer. And this, it's fascinating and it's weird. And so Tony Stark causes brain damage as much as he possibly can, specific to the part of his brain that is storing this information. Of course, all this stuff happens, and, yeah, Norman Osborn's a dick. I hate him. He's the worst ever. But, yeah, I just can't, but yeah, that's kind of what goes on. During the time of Fear itself, which is the part of the comics, the string of comics, where Captain America's shield is broken in half, Iron Man and Thor really team up. They're really working, I don't want to call it symbiotically, but their connection in battle, it's very much a partnership. Like, they work very closely together. And, of course, Captain America is in this mix as well. But it's really Tony and Thor that work and do really well together. And I really like that, because they're like both princes. Like, Tony Stark is a prince of weaponry and capitalism, and then you have Thor, who is a literal prince of Asgard, and it's just like, it's really cool, and it's really fascinating, and I really like it a lot. So yeah, and that pretty much brings us up to context as the comics are being released now. Except for the fact that the Mandarin's back. Yay! That's what's going on right now in the comics, The Return of the Mandarin. This is after Fear itself, and the Mandarin's kind of, he's playing a long game. Like, you know, like with chess, you have like a short game, and then you also have a long game. The Mandarin seems to be playing a long game that is affecting the short game, and it's really fascinating because the Mandarin is like this complex villain. He's an ideological chameleon, which actually is really important because if you see in the Iron Man 3 trailers, whenever you see the Mandarin going to grab out one of his swords, on the back of his neck, you actually see he has a tattoo of Captain America's shield. Basically, he's adopted some of the Captain America ideology and belief system and adapted it to his own views, and it is really fascinating the way that he's set up. So I'm really excited to see how they're going to deal with that in Iron Man 3, because it's just going to be awesome. Except for the fact that it's going to be Man Pain, with a capital M. But it's cool because it's Tony Stark, and I love it, and it's going to be awesome, you guys. It's going to be awesome because Sean Black is doing the screenplay, which means that Jon Favreau doesn't really have to worry about anything other than just being Happy Hogan, which he's been, in interviews, he's actually said that it's going to be a lot of fun. He gets to play around with the character a lot more, which makes me really super excited because I love Happy, you guys. Happy is like the coolest character ever. And then, of course, Gwyneth Paltrow's back as Pepper Potts, and oh my gosh, she was the perfect choice. Like, seriously, they went above and beyond in the casting for these characters. Speaking of casting, okay, so there's all these jokes online, I'm sure you guys have all seen it, where they joke that Robert Downey Jr. is not playing Tony Stark, he is Tony Stark. And then they actually kind of make fun of that in the comics. There is actually specifically a panel from the comics where Iron Man is signing autographs, and there's this little kid who comes up and he's like, here, can you sign my comic book or whatever? And so Iron Man takes it and he starts signing it, and the kid actually says, hey, Iron Man, you know, you kind of sort of look like that one actor dude, Robert Downey Jr. And then Tony Stark as Iron Man replies, he's like, huh, he's sort of a handsome fella, but I'm much more attractive. And it's funny because they make all these little jokes back and forth between the comics and the movies, and it's adorable, and I love it. And you guys, this is so awesome. So, yeah, this is our Iron Man episode. Sorry it ran just a little bit long, but this week's response, I would like you guys to kind of talk about the creation of Iron Man's character as basically Stan Lee's anti-hero. The hero that you don't want to like because it's against everything you are against, like it's against everything that you feel morally, like as a culture basically of the time was against, and how basically he becomes this big superhero from that. So I can't wait to hear your guys' responses. I had fun this week, and I am going to go drown myself in enough Swedish fish and chocolate to make me not feel like I'm going to go on a red room rampage like Natasha does, because I got some red in my ledger, so yeah, chocolate. Okay, bye guys.